The moment he appeared, silence sharpened. Not from fear, no alarm blared, no weapon drawn, but from something colder, older. He didn't shout, didn't resist. He simply existed in the wrong skin, in the wrong cabin, wearing confidence the way others wore privilege. Whispers followed him like shadows, tightening the air in first class. One crew member tilted her head. A passenger lifted a phone, pretending it wasn't recording. Their eyes said what their mouths wouldn't. You don't belong here. What none of them knew, what would shatter careers and scorch reputations, was that the man they dismissed as background was the fuse. And when he lit, everything they built on silence, prejudice, and policy would burn. This story isn't just about racism. It's about justice served not with noise, but with patience. A reckoning that began with humiliation and ended with revelation. Hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Where are you watching from? You'll want to see what happens when the quietest man in the room holds the loudest truth. Langston Miles stepped onto Skylure Flight 298 with a quiet confidence of a man who had earned his comfort. His navy blazer hugged his shoulders just right, the collar crisp, his pants tailored to fall perfectly over polished shoes. He moved through the boarding gate with calm authority, leather carry-on in one hand and his boarding pass in the other. But as he entered the first-class cabin, the atmosphere shifted. Behind the facade of luxury, the leather seats, the gold-trimmed drink menu, the soft jazz humming through overhead speakers, was something colder. From her post near the galley, the lead flight attendant, Deidre, narrowed her eyes and subtly pressed a button on her headset mic. "We've got a suspicious one," she muttered into her sleeve, her tone low but sharp. The murmurs from her co-attendant confirmed she wasn't subtle enough. Two middle-aged passengers in the front row paused mid-conversation, their eyes sliding over Langston's frame, evaluating, judging. Langston walked toward seat 2A, nodding politely to the woman seated across from it. She didn't return the gesture. The leather seats around him were mostly occupied by businessmen and executives, their silver watches gleaming, their briefcases expensive. He placed his bag overhead and turned to sit when Deidre stepped forward, heels clicking sharply against the flooring. "Excuse me, sir," she said with an exaggerated smile. "Could you please remove your hoodie?" Langston blinked, caught off guard. "Hoodie," he echoed, glancing down at his blazer. "Ma'am, this is a sports jacket." She smiled tightly. "It's policy. No hooded garments in first class." Her eyes darted toward a white man a few seats behind Langston, dressed in a near-identical outfit, including a heather gray hoodie under a blue sport coat, then returned without addressing the obvious contradiction. "It's for the comfort of other passengers," she added. Langston reached up, touching the back of his collar, confirming again, "No hood." "There's no hood," he said quietly, glancing around as eyes turned to him. "I'm in dress code." Deidre didn't move. "Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be," she said, tone flattening. A passenger in 3C coughed loudly, then muttered, "Always someone trying to make a scene." Langston's pulse quickened. He reached up and unbuttoned his blazer, showing the smooth inner lining. "See? No hood." Deidre's expression didn't change. "I'll need to confirm your reservation." "You already scanned my ticket," Langston replied. "It's seat 2A." She ignored him, stepping aside and tapping on her tablet. Langston stood there awkwardly, blazer in hand, exposed, while a young woman nearby chuckled and whispered to her boyfriend. Trying to sneak into first class, probably. Langston clenched his jaw, but said nothing. After several long seconds, Deidre returned. "It appears your boarding pass is valid," she said, not hiding her surprise. "Please, make yourself comfortable." Langston sat, skin prickling, stomach tight. The man in the hoodie behind him, still unbothered, still sipping champagne, smirked as their eyes met. Deidre walked off without another word. But Langston could still feel the eyes. The air had changed. He pulled a magazine from the seat pocket, trying to disappear into it. But he couldn't. Not when everything, the stares, the whispers, the forced smile of the attendant, made it clear. He didn't belong, not in their eyes. Another attendant came down the aisle offering drinks. When she reached Langston, her tray was nearly empty. "Just water," she said, handing him a bottle. No glass, no napkin. She didn't offer to refill it later. He watched her pour orange juice and mimosas for others, laughing lightly with passengers who resembled her. The difference in tone was obvious. The man in 2B received a full glass of Cabernet and a plate of mixed nuts. Langston had water and silence. He tapped the call button. No one came. 10 minutes passed. Finally, the attendant returned and glanced down with mild annoyance. The hum of the engines faded beneath the low buzz of murmurs and rustling pages, but Langston Miles sat stiffly in his seat, his fingers tapping quietly against a plastic cup they'd handed him, the echo of Deidre's scrutiny still fresh in his mind. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, giving everything a softer glow, but the atmosphere around him remained tense and uncomfortable. He kept his posture straight, spine rigid, eyes ahead as if doing so would make him invisible, or at least forgotten. The flight attendant with the red lipstick and rigid smile, Deidre, hovered again, clipboard tucked against her chest like a shield. "Sir," she said flatly, leaning just enough into his personal space to make her authority felt. A quick word. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut clearly across the first-class cabin. Passengers in nearby rows looked up from tablets and newspapers. Some pretended to stay out of it, while others didn't bother hiding their interest. Langston turned slowly, calmly. "Yes." Deidre glanced down at her clipboard. "Your appearance is still in violation of our passenger attire protocol," she said, her tone as dry as sandpaper. Langston blinked. "I thought we clarified that already," he replied, his voice calm but firmer this time. "You did." "I didn't," she responded, her gaze narrowing. "Please step into the aisle." Langston's jaw tightened. "Is there a problem?" "I've already explained," she said, her tone sharpening. "Please step out of the seat so we can address this." Langston rose slowly, reluctantly, his shoulders drawing attention now more than ever. He could feel the heat of stares on his back as he stepped into the aisle. "This will only take a minute," Deidre said, but she didn't wait for him to respond. She turned sharply and walked up toward the front bulkhead. Langston followed, his footsteps heavy. "You're making this into something it doesn't need to be," he murmured under his breath. Deidre didn't acknowledge the comment. At the front of the cabin, she stopped, turned, and jabbed her pen toward him. "The dress code applies equally," she declared. Her voice was louder now, clearly audible to half the cabin. "We've received complaints from other guests about your attire. It's causing discomfort." The words struck like a slap. Langston's eyes swept across the nearby rows. None of the other guests looked uncomfortable. They looked amused, intrigued, entertained. One man leaned sideways in his seat to get a better look. A woman snapped a picture with her phone, pretending to check a message. "This is harassment," Langston said calmly. "I'm not violating anything." "Sir, you are being uncooperative," Deidre snapped, pointing again with her pen. "This is your final warning before I call the air marshal." "You're escalating this," Langston replied. "I've done nothing wrong." A young black woman seated in 1C leaned forward, her brows drawn tight with concern. "Excuse me," she said to Deidre, "he's not doing anything wrong. You're the only one making this uncomfortable." Deidre turned like a predator scenting challenge. "Ma'am, please don't get involved." "He has every right to sit here," the woman continued, her voice growing louder. "I saw what you did earlier too." "Enough," a man barked from 2B, a square-jawed executive type in a pale blue button-down. "We don't need a scene." "Sir, please return to your seat," Deidre said, speaking to Langston now. "This is a final request before action is taken." Langston's heart pounded, but he didn't move. He locked eyes with her, refusing to yield. "I'm not going anywhere." "Then I have no choice," she said sharply, and turned on her heel, walking briskly toward the galley. Langston remained standing, breathing slowly, methodically, like he was keeping himself grounded. Behind him, he heard soft whispers. "Did you see that?" What did he do? Probably trying to start something. Why doesn't he just comply? A few seconds later, Deidre returned with another attendant in tow, a man with a security badge tucked into his breast pocket and a walkie clipped to his belt. "Is there an issue?" he asked, looking between Langston and Deidre. "This passenger is refusing to cooperate with flight dress code policy and disrupting our first-class cabin," Deidre announced. The man looked Langston up and down, his eyes pausing at the spotless blazer and pressed slacks. He frowned, but nodded. "We need to resolve this," he said quietly. "We're in the air. If you continue to resist instructions, I'll be forced to move you to a different cabin." "I paid for this seat," Langston replied. "I followed every policy. This is about something else." The security officer's expression flickered, but remained neutral. "Sir, please sit back down. Let's keep the peace." The moment stretched. Langston glanced to the black woman in 1C, who met his gaze with quiet solidarity, then back at the officer. Without a word, he returned to his seat. But as he sat down, he heard the unmistakable click of a camera phone behind him. Someone was recording. Deidre stood at the front, adjusting her headset mic and whispering into her collar. Then she turned and walked to the back, leaving a charged silence in her wake. The cabin had quieted again, at least superficially, but the tension that hung in the air was as palpable as turbulence. The whispers hadn't stopped. They had simply moved behind raised menus, behind cupped hands and flickering phone screens, and Langston, more than anyone, could feel the weight of every glance and every hushed snicker. Deidre, now stationed near the galley, didn't look at him directly, but the way she nudged her coworker, a younger male attendant with a blonde buzz cut and bright eyes, spoke volumes. The two leaned in close, whispering, then giggling softly as if sharing a private joke. The buzz-cut attendant peeked around the galley corner, pretending to inspect the drink cart, but his phone was angled just enough to capture Langston's face. Langston caught the glint of the phone's red recording light, the unmistakable signal of a video being taken. His breath stilled. His eyes flicked to the phone, then to the attendant's smug grin, and back again, but he said nothing. He knew better than to react. Not now, not yet. Instead, he turned his gaze back to the seat ahead, jaw locked, posture ramrod straight, swallowing down the heat that threatened to rise in his chest. A few seats behind him, a woman in an expensive white pantsuit leaned over to her husband, her voice pitched just loud enough to be heard. "Do you think he's lost?" she asked, feigning innocence. "Maybe they're letting coach passengers preview the cabin for inspiration." Her husband chuckled, not bothering to hide his amusement. "Check your QR code again, sir," he said, mimicking Deidre's clipped tone, and both of them burst into stifled laughter. Across the aisle, a man in his late 40s, stocky, with a thick gold ring on each hand, turned slightly in his seat to get a better look at Langston. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The raised eyebrow, the half-smirk, the up-and-down once-over said everything. To them, Langston was a curiosity at best, a threat at worst, but most of all, he was an anomaly, a figure that didn't match their internal checklist of who belonged and who didn't. The indignity wasn't just in the words, it was in the atmosphere, in the subtle shift of shoulders away from him, in the deliberate delays in service, in the fact that every glass of champagne passed him by. Langston reached for the in-flight magazine, hoping to lose himself in the banal comfort of articles about luxury resorts and curated wines. But even that small escape was interrupted. The buzz-cut attendant returned, this time offering a tray of drinks to the row behind him, casually bumping Langston's elbow with a "whoops, sorry" that didn't sound remotely sincere. Langston turned slowly, meeting the young man's gaze. The attendant blinked innocently, smiled too wide, and walked on without waiting for a response. The recording light on his phone was gone now, but Langston knew, his image was already captured, stored, maybe already uploaded. The caption likely something like "This guy really thinks he belongs here," or "When coach dreams big." He could already imagine the hashtags. Hashtag luxury crash, hashtag first class fiction. His stomach turned. He felt the heat rise again, this time tinged with shame, though he had done nothing wrong. Nothing but exist, nothing but wear the wrong skin in the wrong cabin. He glanced again at the black woman in 1C, hoping for an anchor, but her head was bowed now, headphones in, eyes closed. Perhaps self-preservation, perhaps guilt by proximity. Either way, she had retreated, and he couldn't blame her. Survival required silence. A middle-aged white man across the aisle, clearly emboldened by the crowd's mood, leaned slightly into the aisle and raised his phone, pretending to take a selfie, but angling it in such a way that Langston's face would be captured just over his shoulder. Langston watched this man snap the photo, check it, smile, and then begin typing furiously. A moment later, the man chuckled and said to no one in particular, "Gotta love the audacity." A young woman behind him laughed. "He's probably a YouTuber doing a stunt." "No," said another, "he's probably trying to sue. Bet he's got a lawyer on speed dial." Laughter spread like wildfire through the front rows. Deidre returned to the cabin, empty tray in hand, and smiled as she passed. It wasn't the kind of smile offered to a respected guest. It was the grin of someone who believed they had won, who had turned the tide of the room without raising her voice. Langston sat perfectly still. He imagined himself made of marble, solid, unmoved, untouchable. He would not break. Not here. Not for them. But the fire inside him raged, building slowly, deliberately, feeding off every insult, every laugh, every phone aimed his way like a weapon. They didn't know who he was. They didn't know what he carried, not just the weight of his experience, not just the thick file of documented discrimination he had spent a year collecting on this airline, but the authority to end careers, to sever investments, to spark investigations that would dig deeper than any of them could imagine. The overhead chime for the flight crew buzzed, and Deidre returned. Her smile gone now, replaced with something harder, more formal, more dangerous. She leaned toward him with rehearsed civility and said, "Mr. Miles, I'll need you to come with us." Her tone didn't ask, it commanded. Langston blinked slowly. "Why?" he asked, his voice even, though a subtle tension coiled in his gut. "You become a disruption to the comfort of our first-class cabin," she said without blinking, and before he could respond, two men appeared behind her. They weren't dressed like typical security. They wore tight navy polo shirts with the airline's insignia and khaki tactical pants, but their broad shoulders and earpieces betrayed a far more serious presence. Their movements were coordinated, deliberate. "Mr. Miles," the taller one said, stepping forward, "please stand and come with us." Langston didn't move. "Are you detaining me?" he asked quietly. The shorter guard narrowed his eyes. "We're escorting you to a secure seat for passenger safety." "Is that standard for people who sit quietly and don't break rules?" Langston asked. His voice didn't rise. He wanted them to hear it clearly. But Deidre stepped aside, giving the silent signal. Without another word, the tall agent reached down and grabbed Langston's forearm with force. The grip wasn't meant for guidance, it was meant for control. His fingers dug in, twisting flesh and bone. Langston's breath hitched, a flash of heat rising as pain flared in his bicep. "You don't have to do that," Langston said, his voice no longer calm but strained. "This is unnecessary." "Then cooperate," the agent growled, shoving him upright. Langston stumbled as he rose, nearly knocking into the seat across from his. His blazer shifted, revealing the deep red imprint already forming on his arm. He steadied himself, catching the armrest, breathing heavily. Every eye in the cabin was on him now, but not one person spoke in his defense. Instead, a chorus of clicks and camera sounds filled the void. Phones raised, lenses pointed. One man 2 rows back zoomed in deliberately, capturing Langston's grimace, and the guard's hand still clamped to his wrist. Someone muttered, "About time," and another snorted, "See? Always drama." Langston looked toward the black woman in 1C again. Her hands were clenched in her lap, her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but fear or exhaustion held her still. He understood. He was used to being alone. As they pushed him forward, the cabin aisle felt a mile long. The second guard followed, hand hovering near Langston's lower back, ready to escalate. Passengers leaned back, avoiding contact, as if he carried disease. A child peeked around her mother's armrest, eyes wide with curiosity. Her mother gently pulled her back and whispered, "Don't look, honey." Langston's feet shuffled forward. He kept his chin high, even as humiliation licked at his pride like flame. He was led past the galley curtain into the service area, where Deidre now stood holding a tablet, her expression unreadable. She tapped something into a message app, her eyes flicking to Langston, then to her screen. A moment later, her tablet buzzed, and she showed it to the buzz-cut attendant from earlier. He laughed quietly, shaking his head, then turned his phone around to show her something. A quick image, a freeze frame from one of the passengers' recordings, now displayed on his screen. Langston's face twisted slightly from the pain in his arm, framed under fluorescent lighting. They smirked in unison. Deidre typed another message, and Langston caught a glimpse of the caption, "Potential lawsuit bait." The attendant responded with a laughing emoji. Langston clenched his fists. His heart pounded not with fear, but rage. Righteous, coiled, patient rage. The taller guard pushed him sideways into an empty jump seat usually reserved for staff, buckled him in tightly, the restraint unnecessarily snug. "You'll remain here for the rest of the flight," the guard said, stepping back. "You'll be met upon arrival." "Met by who?" Langston asked. "Airport security," the guard replied. "They'll evaluate the situation." "What situation?" Langston pressed. The memory of being manhandled by airline security still throbbed in his bicep, the bruise blooming beneath his sleeve like a black mark of injustice, a brand declaring him out of place. Every fiber of his being burned with restraint, not just from the literal straps pinning him to the wall, but from the emotional torque twisting inside him. The churning disgust at being paraded down the aisle like a criminal in cuffs, while smug strangers filmed him like a sideshow. He could still see the look on Deidre's face, the detached efficiency of someone who had done this before, perhaps too many times, someone who saw him not as a customer or a man, but as a disruption, a problem to be managed, a threat to neutralize. His phone, now back in his pocket, but still recording, captured the murmurs from beyond the curtain. He didn't need to see their faces anymore to hear the scorn in their voices. He probably forged the ticket. One passenger whispered with faux pity. "You can't buy class," another replied, followed by a low chuckle. A ding from the intercom silenced them for a moment, and then came the final insult. The voice of Deidre, smooth and practiced, breaking over the cabin speakers like an announcement for turbulence. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your cooperation," she said. "A passenger has been relocated due to a dress code violation. If you have concerns, feel free to contact customer service after landing. Otherwise, sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight." The wording was neutral, but the implication wasn't. Dress code violation. Langston's lips parted, breath caught in his throat. That was the official story now, the narrative being cemented in real time. He wasn't a man who had followed every rule, boarded with a valid ticket, and taken his seat like any other. No, he was a dress code violator, a disruption, a man who couldn't follow simple rules. Behind the partition, a ripple of amusement passed through the cabin. Someone clapped sarcastically, and others joined in with quiet, stifled laughter. One passenger said loud enough for others to hear, "If you don't like it, sue. It's America." That triggered more laughter, louder this time, uninhibited, like a pack of jackals finding fresh meat. Langston's shoulders trembled slightly. He closed his eyes for just a moment, trying to block out the sound, the words, the smell of reheated meals wafting from the galley, everything. But the sting in his eyes grew too hot, the tension behind his skull too thick. His throat tightened, the pressure like a fist closing around his windpipe. He turned his head slightly away from the galley door and let the tears prick his eyes without falling. Not yet. Not in front of them. A pair of flight attendants passed by the curtain, whispering to each other, unaware or uncaring, that Langston could hear every word. "That hoodie probably wasn't even real," said one, the young buzzcut man from earlier. "You see the way he got all defensive? Bet he's faking his status, trying to get a payout or some TikTok clout." The other laughed, a cruel snort. "Well, he got the clout now. Bet he's trending by the time we land. We should put him on the no-fly list just for the drama," the buzz-cut attendant joked. Langston's hands clenched, nails digging into his palms. That was their game. That was always the game. Push someone far enough until they snap, then point and say, "See? Told you so." It was bait, and he refused to bite. Langston Miles sat in the jump seat near the rear galley, physically restrained and emotionally cornered, with every breath steeped in disbelief, humiliation, and silent rage. Though the laughter from the front cabin had faded into intermittent murmurs and the clinking of cocktail glasses, the weight of what had just transpired hung over him like a storm cloud suspended by threads. His muscles ached from the tension of the restraint and the bruising grip of the security agent, and the buzzing in his ears from Deidre's public announcement still lingered like a hornet circling his pride. But it wasn't over. Moments later, the intercom dinged again, and the aircraft banked into descent. A voice came through, not the captain, but a terse, unfamiliar one announcing that upon landing, a passenger would be assisted off the aircraft for further review of behavior. It was framed as procedural, innocuous even, but the implication was razor-sharp. Passengers turned again, some craning their necks, others raising their phones like they were capturing the final scene of a reality show episode. Langston sat unmoving, his expression a mask of control, but behind it the fire burned hotter than ever. As the wheels touched down and the plane taxied to the gate, the guards returned, flanking him without speaking. They released the restraint, but not the control. One of them reached for his bag in the overhead bin, tossed it toward him without care, and motioned for him to stand. "Let's go," the taller one said, already walking forward. Langston stood, adjusted his blazer, grabbed his bag, and walked. They didn't give him a chance to put his shoes back on, having asked him earlier to remove them during the relocation process, under the guise of standard security procedure. So now he walked barefoot down the first-class aisle, bag clutched like a possession reclaimed after processing, passing the very people who had watched him be stripped of dignity in slow motion. Cameras clicked again. One woman whispered, "Barefoot now? Oh, this is rich." Another leaned into her husband and whispered, "Should have known it was a scam." A man in business attire raised his glass in mock salute as Langston passed, adding, "Safe travels," with a smirk. The humiliation was total. He moved like a ghost through that aisle, but he saw every face, remembered every sneer, every silent onlooker who could have said something but didn't. As he stepped off the plane and onto the jet bridge, he felt the chill of the airport air against his soles, but he kept walking. Two ground agents waited near the gate, speaking into radios, glancing his way, but saying nothing. The taller guard gave them a brief nod and left without further explanation, as if passing off a package. "You'll need to remain here while we process a report," one of the agents said, guiding him to a bench just outside the gate, positioned under a bright overhead light like a spotlight in a theater of shame. "Your phone will be restricted to emergency use only," the second agent added, and with a few swipes on a device, Langston's in-flight Wi-Fi access was disabled. "Don't move until someone comes to speak with you." And just like that, they walked away, leaving him seated alone, barefoot, blazer wrinkled, phone dark, surrounded by the flow of arriving passengers giving him wide, suspicious berth, as if he were a threat. Several looked his way with cautious curiosity, others with outright disdain, a few children pointed, and one woman snapped a photo as if documenting an anomaly. Just before the ground agents rounded a corner, Langston caught one of them glancing back at him, smirking as he leaned toward his colleague, whispering something that made them both laugh. He was no longer on the plane, but the ostracism followed him like a shadow. Minutes turned to half an hour, and no one came. The bench was hard, the lighting harsh, and the crowd relentless. Langston sat straight, eyes forward, refusing to shrink. A janitor passed by and paused to glance at his feet, then shook his head and muttered something under his breath before continuing. A TSA agent walked past and frowned, scanning Langston up and down as if assessing a potential detainment. Still, Langston said nothing. His phone, now freed from the aircraft systems, buzzed faintly with delayed notifications. He opened one discreetly, the recording he had started hours ago still active, the file saved and automatically backed up. He smiled faintly for the first time in hours. They had tried to silence him, tried to brand him with the weight of shame and make him disappear before the flight even ended. But they had failed to notice one critical detail. Langston Miles had not come on that plane merely as a passenger. He had come as a witness, as a litmus test, as a trap wrapped in a calm demeanor. And every insult, every shove, every laugh, every word spoken when they thought he had no power, all of it was now evidence. The video showed the trut. Langston Miles remained seated on the hard bench of the terminal gate, his bare feet planted firmly on the cold tile floor, the chill climbing his spine as every minute passed without acknowledgement or apology. He watched the flow of people blur into one long, indifferent stream, his eyes fixed, but his mind working with mechanical precision. The notification buzz of his phone offered the only company he'd had since being left there, humiliated, exposed, and strategically ignored. But what the flight crew and staff hadn't realized was that the moment they severed their claim to control, by leaving him alone with his device, they gave him the one thing he needed most, a signal. In that quiet void of justice, Langston uploaded the video. Not the clip, not the highlights, but the entire recorded flight, unedited, raw, time-stamped from the moment he boarded until the last humiliating step off the plane. He added a caption, short, quiet, surgical. "This is how they treat us. No hoodie, no problem. Still removed. Watch it happen." The upload completed. He didn't tag anyone. He didn't hashtag. He simply pressed publish and set the phone down beside him. Then he waited. The first ping came 5 minutes later. A journalist from a mid-level news outlet reposted it with the comment, "This better be fake." But it wasn't. The second came 6 minutes after that. An attorney specializing in civil rights law quote tweeted the video. "No policy can justify this. I want the name of the airline." By the 10th minute, Langston's name had been dug up, not by him, but by the digital world's army of amateur detectives. They found his professional history, his ghost investments, his connection to venture capital firms, and his anonymous executive title tied to an investor group known to be negotiating fleet expansion deals with major airlines. By the 15th minute, Langston Miles was trending. By the 20th, the airport television's silent, looping headlines beneath airline commercials and stock footage of travel destinations began flashing banner alerts. Breaking. Airline under fire after viral video shows man forcibly removed over dress code. The footage played across screens near his gate. He watched travelers pause in front of them, heads tilting, brows raising. They saw his face on screen, blurred at first, then clarified as more versions of the video surfaced. One woman gasped, nudging her partner. Another man, on a call, stopped mid-sentence and pointed to the screen. Langston remained seated. He let the storm roll in naturally. No announcement, no media blast. Just truth, naked and unfiltered, rolling like thunder over the terminal. 25 minutes in, a nearby gate agent, clearly flustered, walked past Langston without meeting his eyes. 10 minutes after that, 3 security officers arrived, not to confront, but to protect. "We're here to ensure your safety, Mr. Miles," one said, his tone completely different from the authority-laced voices of the earlier flight crew. Langston looked at him calmly. "I'm not moving until I finish my statement." They nodded, stepping back. He picked up his phone, opened his front camera, and went live. "My name," he said, steady and deliberate, "is Langston Miles." His voice carried not through a microphone or overhead speaker, but through thousands of screens as his followers, new and old, watched the man behind the viral video speak for the first time. "I boarded Skylure Flight 298 with a valid ticket. I wore a blazer, slacks, and carried one bag. I followed every rule. And still I was humiliated, harassed, filmed without consent, and forcibly removed for no reason beyond the color of my skin and the assumptions made about me." His voice remained calm, measured, but the fire beneath it radiated into every word. "What the airline didn't know," he continued, "is that I'm not just a passenger. I'm one of the silent investors who recently pledged a multi-billion-dollar expansion package for this airline's modernization plan. $3 billion, to be exact. That deal was pending final approval. My presence on that flight was part of an anonymous evaluation of service standards across all classes of travel. What they failed was not just courtesy, they failed integrity." Gasps echoed from behind him. People had gathered now. A crowd had formed near the gate monitors, many with phones in hand, watching his live stream while staring at the man in real time. "I have no intention of suing," Langston said. "I have no intention of demanding apologies. What I intend to do is terminate the pending deal and reallocate the funds to an airline that recognizes the dignity of every human being who steps aboard." One older white woman covered her mouth with her hand. A young man in a hoodie said, "Holy shit," under his breath. Airport staff nearby exchanged glances, visibly unsettled. The mood had flipped completely. Langston didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture or rage. He simply let the truth land like an avalanche. The aftermath of Langston Miles' livestream had not only shattered the sterile calm of the airport terminal, it detonated across every screen, feed, and phone within minutes, a shockwave of truth wrapped in quiet fury. Reporters flooded the concourse like a surge tide. Security reappeared with conflicting instructions, and passengers from neighboring gates swarmed the viewing area around him. But Langston remained composed, seated on the same hard bench, blazer still draped over his shoulder, bare feet still pressing against the tile, a living contradiction to every image the airline had ever projected about luxury, safety, and class. His phone vibrated incessantly, calls from legal teams, business partners, silent investors, activist organizations, even politicians, but he answered none of them. Instead, he rose slowly, calmly, with the same deliberate grace that had marked his entrance into the now infamous first-class cabin of Skylure Flight 298. Without being asked, the security team stepped into position, escorting him through a now-cleared terminal corridor as cameras flashed and voices shouted questions he ignored. Within minutes, a small podium was assembled outside the terminal beneath a concrete overhang, and Langston stepped behind it with the composed gravity of a man who'd prepared for this exact moment his entire life. No press handler, no assistant, just a single printed statement in his hand and the eyes of the world watching. "This morning," he began, "I boarded a flight as a paying customer. I was removed from that flight not because of what I did, but because of what I represented to the people serving aboard it." He paused, letting the silence settle, his words landing with the precision of a judge's gavel. "The crew decided, based on my skin, my clothes, and their own biases, that I didn't belong where I had paid to sit. I was humiliated, assaulted, publicly degraded, and left at the gate without shoes, without assistance, and without apology." Cameras snapped wildly. Reporters leaned forward. Passengers, watching from behind barricades, whispered in disbelief. "But what Skylure Airlines didn't know," he continued, "was that I wasn't just a passenger. I'm the managing partner of Horizon Equities Group, and until last night, we were preparing to finalize a $3 billion fleet modernization deal with Skylure Airlines." A collective inhale sucked the air from the crowd. "That deal is no longer on the table," Langston stated. "As of 1 hour ago, all proposed investments have been withdrawn. The funds are being reallocated to a competitor whose service standards align with the values of equity, dignity, and human decency." Behind the cameras, a Skylure representative stepped backward as if struck. "Additionally," Langston said, lifting the second page of his notes, "my legal team has initiated a formal federal complaint with the Department of Transportation and the Department of Justice regarding civil rights violations exhibited on Flight 298. He let that sit for a beat, then continued. "This complaint includes video documentation, audio recordings, and corroborated testimony." Now his eyes lifted from the page. "And it includes the names of every crew member involved." Gasps rippled through the press. "But this isn't the first time Skylure has profiled black passengers," Langston added. "And I can prove it." He raised a small flash drive and inserted it into the laptop set on the stand beside him. The screens behind him lit up, projecting surveillance footage, compiled data, and leaked internal memos gathered over months of investigation. The first image, a chart displaying disproportionate removals of black passengers from premium cabins versus white passengers over a 5-year period. The second, an internal message exchange between crew supervisors joking about a code hoodie as shorthand for unwanted passengers. The third, still images from 5 separate flights where black passengers were singled out, followed by notes marked resolved, guest rebooked economy or exited flight. "These are patterns," Langston said, "not coincidences." He turned back to the crowd. This morning, Skylure used dress code as a smokescreen, but what they really enforced was exclusion. One image showed Deidre's face, captured from in-flight video, eyes narrowed, mouth twisted in disdain as she ordered Langston from his seat. Another showed the buzz-cut attendant filming Langston, grinning while doing it. "They are not the only ones responsible," Langston said, "but they are the ones who acted with impunity, believing they could do so without consequence." Murmurs of disbelief and outrage surged through the crowd. One reporter yelled out, "Do you want their jobs?" Langston didn't flinch. "I want accountability," he said, "and I want policy change." He then outlined a list of demands: mandatory unconscious bias training for all Skylor employees, a public apology from the airline's board, and full transparency of all discrimination-related complaints within the past 10 years. He concluded with a final statement: "This isn't about revenge. It's about recognition. Recognition that human dignity does not come with a price tag, a ticket class, or a skin tone. I am Langston Miles. I have influence, but millions do not. This fight is for them." He stepped back. Cameras clicked furiously. Journalists shouted questions. Social media exploded again. Split screens on financial networks showed the airline's CEO, Robert Nevington, delivering a shaky press statement while Langston's now viral livestream played beside him with closed captions highlighting every damning word. "We take these allegations seriously," Nevington stammered, sweat beading on his forehead, "and will be launching a thorough internal review." But the damage was already irreparable. Journalists across platforms eviscerated the performance, fact-checking him live as decades of untouched racial bias complaints against Skylor reemerged from dusty archives, suddenly relevant and red-hot. By 3 p.m., the airline's public relations team had locked their social media accounts due to an overwhelming flood of comments, hashtags like #SkylerBoycott and #FlyFairNotFake trending globally, and viral threads detailing eerily similar stories from other Black passengers who had experienced what Langston endured, only without a camera, without a platform, without recourse. Influential figures from every industry began speaking out. Civil rights attorneys posted comparisons between Langston's footage and archived cases they had fought and lost. Senators released joint statements condemning racial bias in air travel. Celebrities reshared the video with messages like "Enough is enough," and "This isn't just one flight." The FAA, pressured by mounting public scrutiny, issued a midday release confirming a formal federal investigation into Skylor's passenger conduct policies and systemic enforcement disparities. The Department of Transportation and the Department of Justice announced they were collaborating on civil rights inquiries, citing Langston's video as a concrete catalyst for broader review. Shareholders panicked. Airlines in competition with Skylor issued vague but pointed statements about commitments to inclusion and safe spaces for all passengers, thinly veiled jabs that further isolated the embattled company. Meanwhile, inside Skylor's corporate headquarters, chaos reigned. Emergency board meetings ran back-to-back, and executives scrambled to craft a salvageable narrative. But their attempts to control the story failed at every turn. Internal Slack messages leaked to the press, showing top-level staff referring to Langston's incident as unfortunate but manageable, a phrase that became a meme within minutes. Staff morale plummeted as employees across the country were bombarded by angry travelers and canceled bookings. Deidre and the buzz-cut attendant, identified by name through flight rosters and video overlays, were immediately suspended pending investigation. Their faces, already familiar from the footage, appeared on late-night television as comedians roasted the airline's mishandling, juxtaposing Deidre's smirk with Langston's calm monologue to chilling comedic effect. Protesters began gathering outside Skylor offices in major cities, New York, Atlanta, Los Angeles, holding signs that read "Dignity isn't first class," and "We fly, we fight." Activist groups organized online boycotts, rerouted charity events, and canceled contracts with the airline. Within 48 hours, 3 corporate partners pulled out of major promotional deals. But the most significant blow came unexpectedly, live, during a second press conference. Robert Nevington took the stage again, visibly exhausted, face gaunt under studio lighting. As he began to read from his prepared remarks, the press demanded answers about racial bias training, past settlements, and whether the airline had ever investigated itself. Under pressure, and with the board's silent consent, he choked out the words that would define his legacy. Effective immediately, "I am stepping down as CEO of Skylor Airlines." The room exploded in shouts. Split screens broadcast his resignation beside a loop of Langston's livestream, the moment he said, $3 billion. Gone because of who I am and how they see me. That clip became an anthem. It was set to music, used in spoken word videos, quoted in news editorials. Every network ran specials on Bias in the Skies, profiling not just Langston, but dozens of Black travelers who came forward with eerily similar stories. A retired school principal described how she had been denied boarding for wearing a head wrap. A young college student recalled being removed from a flight because a fellow passenger felt unsafe when he asked to switch seats. Langston's story opened the floodgates. Civil suits were filed, not just against Skylure, but against other carriers with similar track records. A new movement had begun, centered on the idea that air travel, long seen as a symbol of privilege, must now be accountable to justice. Amid the national reckoning, Skylure's board issued a formal apology, not in vague terms, but in writing, published in major newspapers and on their now reopened social accounts. In the weeks that followed Skylure's collapse into scandal and reform, the world that had once looked away now leaned in, compelled by a story that refused to fade. Langston Miles became more than a name, more than a face caught in the glare of a phone camera. He became a movement wrapped in precision and grace, a symbol of restraint wielded like a weapon, of dignity carved from public degradation. What had started as humiliation had unfolded into transformation, not just of policy and leadership, but of hearts. And that transformation came to a head one rainy afternoon in a modest auditorium in Atlanta, where a town hall-style forum had been organized to foster conversation between airline employees, civil rights advocates, and members of the community. The event was intimate, deliberately so, meant not for spectacle, but for reckoning. There were no microphones, no flashing lights, no curated panels, just rows of folding chairs, a few local journalists, and people ready to confront the uncomfortable truth. Langston sat near the front, wearing a gray suit and no tie, sleeves rolled up, hands clasped as speaker after speaker stood to share their stories. Some were quiet, hesitant, Black travelers recalling moments of silent exclusion, Latino passengers describing being questioned more than once about their carry-ons, Muslim women recounting the side eyes, the whispers, the random searches. Others spoke with fire, activists who had been calling for industry accountability for years, flight attendants who confessed to silently watching their co-workers escalate tension for sport. And then a pause came in the room, a silence that drew every eye to the center aisle, where a woman rose slowly from her seat in the fourth row. Deidre. She looked different now, not in appearance, but in weight. Her polished mask was gone, replaced by something raw and human. Her shoulders sagged under invisible burdens, and her eyes, though still sharp, carried a red-rimmed weariness that no sleep could erase. She walked to the front slowly, each step deliberate, and when she turned to face the audience, her voice trembled. "My name is Deidre Collins," she began, "and I'm here because I need to say something to someone I wronged." Her eyes landed on Langston. "You don't owe me a response," she said quickly, her voice cracking, "but I need to say this aloud." She exhaled sharply, as if steadying herself against a wind only she could feel. "When you boarded that plane, I didn't see a customer. I saw a problem. I saw a threat that wasn't there. I made assumptions based on my own comfort, my own upbringing, my own unchecked bias, and I used policy to justify what I thought was professionalism. But it wasn't. It was cowardice." The room remained still. "I watched the footage," she continued. "Not just yours, but the footage people sent me from other flights, other stories, other lives. And I saw the pattern. I saw myself in every one of those crew members who laughed, who dismissed, who judged. And I hated what I saw." Her voice faltered again. "I lost my job. I lost my pension. But more than that, I lost the illusion that I was one of the good ones. I wasn't, and I want to know how to be better. I don't want pity or redemption handed to me. I want to do the work. I want to understand. I want to serve differently." She looked at Langston again, eyes brimming. "If there's a way to help repair what I helped break, please show me." For a long moment, no one moved. Langston leaned forward, studying her face, not searching for guilt or tears, but for sincerity. And what he saw wasn't performative remorse or convenient regret. He saw the start of change, He rose quietly, stepped forward, and for the first time since the flight, stood face to face with the woman who had tried to erase his presence with policy and posture. "Deidre," he said softly, "thank you for showing up." She looked down, her breath catching, but he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a brochure, simple and clean. He held it out to her. "I've started something new," he said. "It's a program called Gatekeepers. We're building a training model that goes beyond corporate diversity checklists. It brings former offenders, people who've been part of the problem, into the conversation, not to shame them, but to reshape them. We teach history, empathy, de-escalation, implicit bias, but most of all, we teach accountability and the courage to act in real time." She took the brochure with trembling hands. "I want you to be part of it," he said, "not because you have to be forgiven, but because you chose to face the mirror and didn't look away." Her lip quivered, and a few quiet tears spilled down her cheek. She nodded, unable to speak. Applause didn't erupt. No one stood, but a wave of breath moved through the room. Release, relief, recognition. Later that evening, as Langston left the auditorium and stepped into the cool dusk, he was met not with cameras or chants, but with quiet gratitude from those who had witnessed something more powerful than outrage. He had reminded the world of a truth often lost in headlines, that justice is not only about punishment, it is about transformation. It is about facing the ugliest parts of ourselves and deciding to rebuild something better. Langston walked alone for a while, the night air crisp against his skin, the city lights glinting like quiet stars. He didn't need fanfare or banners. He had seen the beginning of something new, an industry beginning to confront its shadows, a community choosing to engage rather than withdraw, and even the face of an old antagonist finally learning to listen. The end. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe to support more content like this. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about the plot? Which moment hit you the hardest? And where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let's talk.